The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Frankly Speaking. This episode is going to be a little different from a couple different fronts anyway. I guess my first 6 or 7 episodes here have been on a Christian type of format, but this is actually a potpourri show. So I'm kind of delving into other areas here. Today I'm going to delve in the exciting world of politics. And we have a very exciting thing about politics, at least on the national front. And my guest here today is Jim Rubens. He's a Republican running for the U.S. Senate seat this year against incumbent Kelly Ayotte, which you'll be facing in the primary on September 13th, I believe. But and also another front I want to mention, I usually have a break in the middle of my shows, but this time I'm not. A lot of times when I have a guest, I worry about if they can make an hour, if they can last an hour with the subject matter we talk about. But I've seen Mr. Rubens on another media outlet, and I'm very, very confident that he can fill an hour with all the questions we're going to cover. Jim, how are you doing today?
Thank you for having me, Frank. And yes, there's a lot to talk about. The country is stressed. A lot of repairs are needed, so no problem filling an hour.
So tell the people who aren't familiar with you, tell my audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and why you're running for U.S. Senate.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you. I live in Hanover with my family. I have a son. He's in college now, and in Boston. At the Berklee College of Music, I'm proud to say.
Oh.
And he's a musician. And I've started and run 10 small businesses, most of them here in New Hampshire. So I know a lot about getting my hands dirty. Some businesses I worked with my hands, and I grew a number of them up and sold them. I invest in real estate and high-tech startups, medical device startups. And I served in the state Senate in the 1990s, in the state Senate representing the Upper Valley, District 5, serving in Concord, and I am the author of SB 2 voting. I got that passed. It allows people to vote in the privacy of a voting booth on their town and school district budgets, and most of the towns in the state have adopted that method of voting. I am the author of the state's charter school, and I'm proud to say here in Nashua you have the state's top testing public school. It's a charter school in the entire state, the Academy of Science and Design. My law that I wrote and got passed allowed that, and the Academy of Science and Design runs at about half the cost per student of the traditional public school. So it's a choice school. Parents are choosing it for advanced math and science and STEM academics. And I wrote that law. I wrote the state's victim restitution law. So I love policy. I love getting things done. I'm really good at it. I'm conservative. And I'm running this time for really 4 major reasons. And I differ with the incumbent, Senator Ayotte, on all 4 of these reasons. Number 1 reason, we've got a jobs problem in America. People are under really serious stress. The wages of Americans, your median, your most typical American family, are down about 7% since the year 2000. So wages are down, and the cost of living is up about 35%. So pressure on American families is more than it has been, and it's growing. And most families have no retirement savings, so we need to change what we're doing in the United States to be pro-jobs. And so I therefore differ with the incumbent, Senator Ayotte, in her vote for the immigration bill, the amnesty open borders bill. We need to be having fewer immigrants coming into our country. We need to have fewer H-1B visas, which are driving down wages, both with legal immigration and illegal immigration. So I'm in favor of jobs, good paying jobs for Americans. I'm in favor of a number of other things that you can see on my website, jimrubens.com. I issued a press release today with I think about an 8-point plan to increase job formation in the United States. But one of the things we've got to do, one of the basic things, is jobs for American citizens. This is why I'm not in favor of the trade deals like the TPP that Senator Ayotte voted for. Again, we have seen the impact of these trade deals on American workers. Wages are being pressed down, jobs are being exported, and again, the benefits of free trade are good, but if these free trade deals are anti-American worker, that's not good. So again, I differ with her on that critical jobs issue. The next issue that is really important to me is the fact our country is essentially bankrupt. Okay, we're $19 trillion in debt right now. And when you add the unfunded future promises that we've made to people in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the pensions for federal workers, we're about $100 trillion in the hole, underwater right now. That's about $1 million per American household. And Senator Ayotte voted just in the last 2 years to add $1.5 trillion to that debt. We're at end stage fiscal insanity, and I differ again with the incumbent here. Congress has got to exercise the power of the purse and begin to be restrained so that, if you look out 10 years, the Congressional Budget Office has shown that we're going to be borrowing another $1 trillion a year for the next 10 years on the path that Congress is now on. So this has got to change. We need fiscal frugality back in Congress again. This is at the very bedrock of what Republicans stand for, is fiscal sanity, fiscal frugality. And Senator Ayotte has gone off the reservation on this matter. So spend what we take in, balance the budget, cut the pork, preserve Social Security. So that's issue number 2. Issue number 3 is we need to keep Americans safe. And global terror is at the top of everyone's concern. So again, I come back to, we've got to have borders in this country. Okay? And Senator Ayotte is wrong on this. We've got to have borders. This amnesty bill was the wrong approach. We have got to be careful in several other ways. The methods by which we have intervened, for example, in Libya and in Syria, Iraq over the past 6 years, we have, and again, this is Hillary Clinton's plan. Senator Ayotte cheerled for it. We have intervened in Libya. We have intervened to fund, arm, and train ISIS before they were ISIS. The Pentagon, our military leaders, warned us, do not do these things. They will accelerate terrorism. ISIS now is operational in 8 countries, including Libya. It has made us less safe. It has spread terror. It has spread chaos throughout the Middle East. So we need a different approach to national security, which I, again, have on my website, jimrubens.com. I've got a 14-point plan, which I won't go into here, but it's detailed, and it's a different way of keeping Americans safe, but it does not cause the spread of terrorism. We have to contain terrorism. I'll just start with the 2 first points. Cut off the money. Saudi Arabia is the world's leading funder of terrorist ideology. They support 20 to 30,000 madrasas around the world, which promote this radical, violent, hateful version of Islam that trains people of the faith to hate and to kill. So we've got to tell Saudi Arabia, our so-called ally, stop funding terror ideology. We've got to tell our ally, so-called ally Turkey, which keeps an open border between northern Syria and Turkey so that ISIS fighters can go up and get medical care in Turkey. The open border through Erdogan, he's the head of Turkey. His son runs the black market by which ISIS exports black market oil, valuables, human trafficking. It's how they get money. We've got to tell our so-called ally Turkey, stop the black market that funds terror. So those are just the first 2 of my 14-point plan. And it goes on at jimrubens.com from there. But we need a strategy that does not make Americans less safe. And the strategy of Hillary Clinton and Kelly Ayotte has been the wrong one. The 4th issue, before we get to your questions, I know you've got a few of them. The 4th issue of great concern to me is the fact that Washington is bought and paid for. It's corrupt. It's why we have a tax code that is filled with perks and benefits for people with $1,000 an hour lobbyists. It's why we have the budget that is so out of whack, $1 trillion in the hole each year for the next 10 years because the lobbyists have got to control our budget. It's why we have a regulatory system that is anti-small business. Big business can handle it. Big banks can handle this complex regulatory system. Our small banks that are our New Hampshire community banks are being starved, and they're it's preventing small businesses from getting loans, this system. So we've got to change the crony capitalist, corrupt system, the bought and paid for system in Washington that leads to half of U.S. senators, when they leave office, become lobbyists. They earn $2 to $3 million a year. They're collecting campaign contributions from people who want budget deficits, who want complex tax codes, who want pork and cronyism in the budget. We've got to change this. So I'm not in favor of a bought and paid for political system. And so those are my 4 top issues: keeping America safe, bringing job security back to America, balancing the budget without tax increases, and ending the crony capitalist corrupt system of Washington. And as you can see, I differ sharply with the incumbent, Senator Ayotte, on all 4 of these issues, and I'm providing a choice for voters.
So one of the inspirations to you running this past, because you've only had your candidacy announced for the past
3 weeks or so,
3 weeks
Yeah,
or
just got
so.
going. Yep.
So the New Hampshire primary must have been a very incentive for you to say, this could be my time. To see Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, they really kicked butt in the New Hampshire primary.
That's true. That is very true. This is not about me. This is not about, oh boy, this is my chance to get into politics and run for
Voters
US
are
Senate.
angry this time around.
This is the difference that makes it possible for, and I'm obviously the anti-establishment candidate. I've been fighting the establishment here in all the work I've done for 20 years in state politics as a state senator and in my volunteer work. I've been anti-establishment for the whole time, and it might be the year, if we saw in our primaries, as you point out, both for Donald Trump winning by a landslide in our primary and Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side winning by a landslide. People are sick and tired of Washington business as usual. The American public sees that Washington is corrupt. They know that the people they've sent down there are not. My slogan is make Washington work for Americans. I think it's time for that. So not only are these issues important to me, but the times are right, because the public is really ready for a change. They're ready for candidates to get elected and go down there and work for Americans again, and not for their campaign donors.
Okay. Well, one thing before we get into the nitty gritty about all the issues, one of the things I've always heard about the presidential election, especially, is that one of the most important issues is picking the Supreme Court justices.
Yes.
And we unfortunately about a month ago had the demise, the passing, I should say, of Anton Scalia. And there's been a lot of talk about, replacing him. I guess President Obama picked this judge, Merrick Garland, who got some high praise, I guess, like a year or so ago for another federal judgeship from Orrin Hatch, a Republican from Utah, Republican senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch. So what's your take on, should the Senate vote right now for a Supreme Court replacement to Anton Scalia, or do you think, like the senators and congressmen now are saying, the Republicans are saying, we should wait for the American people to vote for a president, and that whatever president's party will probably pick, whether it's Merrick Garland or maybe a more conservative justice? What's your take on that?
The answer for me is no. The President Obama has shown his hand. He appointed Judge Garland. Judge Garland fails the test of constitutional conservatism. We know right off the bat that he is suspicious of the rights given to Americans in the Bill of Rights. He has, in his rulings recently, he has ruled against the individual right to keep and bear arms. I'm a person who strongly supports the individual right to keep and bear arms. So President Obama showed his hand. He nominated someone who is constitutionally suspicious, antagonistic to the Bill of Rights, antagonistic to the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So the Senate should not vote on his appointments. And the reason for this, I know how I would vote. I would vote no. I have no problem. What I'm concerned about is senators like Kelly Ayotte. She voted for Loretta Lynch, who's now our Attorney General, very much in the mold of Judge Garland, a liberal. She said she would have voted for Sonia Sotomayor, a very liberal judge who is now on the Supreme Court. So the problem is some U.S. senators wilt they wilt under public pressure. They wilt under the pressure from Washington to get along and go along. She talks a lot about getting along and going along in Washington, and you can't do that with a Bill of Rights. When a Supreme Court judge is appointed and then approved by the Senate, that judge could be there for 2 decades or more, and the risks are too great.
So was it last week or the week before the Supreme Court addressed this situation out of California, where I guess a California teacher thought it was very unfair that she should be forced to join the teachers union, and it was a 4-4 vote,
Right.
and therefore it was upheld for the labor unions. Would this ruling set like a precedence on labor unions that you got to join a labor union if you're a worker, or else they're not going to represent you fairly in a union grievance?
This is a fight that's been going on for a long time. When I was in the state Senate, I voted for right to work because I believe that individual employees who work for a particular company that might be unionized may or may not want to contribute part of their wages to that union. They might feel, that particular employee might feel that that union is not representing them effectively, might be pushing politics that they disagree with. So the union needs to sell itself on the basis of its performance, and employees, like any voluntary organization, should be allowed to give their part of their wages to that union or not for their own wishes. So
Okay.
So the 4-4 split leaves the California decision in place. I think the question will come back to the Supreme Court. I think it's likely.
Probably like next year when they have another
When-
replacement for Anton
when it's
Scalia.
back up to 9, the case might come back to the U.S.
And
Supreme
how
Court.
do you feel about
Yeah.
the argument that if Hillary Clinton wins in November, she can pick somebody a lot younger and a lot more liberal than Merrick Garland for a Supreme Court justice?
I've heard that argument, and I think that President Obama blew it. Republicans might have been willing to look at one of his nominees if it was a constitutional conservative. I doubt that President Obama would ever nominate such a person, but he had his chance. He blew it. He tipped his hand. He showed his hand with Judge Garland. So I think we're frozen until after the election, and that's my position. The U.S. Senate should not have a hearing on any of his nominees.
Sounds good to me. Okay, now in fairness to Republicans in the Senate supposedly dragging their feet on the Supreme Court nominee, do you feel that the FBI and the Department of Justice are currently dragging their feet on Hillary Clinton's federal email scandal? Um, I mean, comparing Hillary Clinton to General Petraeus several years earlier, they seem to have a whole different take on, prosecuting him versus prosecuting Hillary Clinton. Do you see a double standard here?
There is clearly a double standard. I'd like to talk about Hillary Clinton a little bit. I already mentioned her failed nation-building wars that have left us less safe, that have spread terrorism, that have made more chaos in the Middle East. So I find fault with her policies. And again, unfortunately, Senator Ayotte buys into and cheerleads for these failed nation-building war policies. Hillary Clinton is probably the most corrupt single major politician that we've seen. She makes President Nixon look like a piker. Let me just give you one example. When she was Secretary of State, she approved the sale of 20% of U.S. uranium assets to Russia. Now, Russia is not exactly our friend, all right? 20% of U.S., this is a critical resource. It's a national security resource. It's an energy resource. Within weeks of the date at which she, as Secretary of State, approved the sale of this uranium, within weeks, before and after, her husband, Bill Clinton, earned hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees from individuals who were party to the transaction. The Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, her big foundation, received millions of dollars of donations within weeks before and after this approval was granted by her Secretary of State, to the Russians. Millions of dollars of contributions to parties to the transaction to the Clinton Foundation. It's legal, amazingly, and this is one of the things that have got to be changed in Washington, this corrupt system. This is why people don't trust Washington, and people are correct when they see this stuff. And she's a party to these transactions. She apparently has no problem with them. again, it's why I think Americans are so frustrated with Washington, because they can see it's corrupt. Americans, and I can see it. And
Yeah.
it's why I'm in favor of a set of solutions to this, which is on my website, jimrubens.com. I would fix this corrupt, crony capitalist money system in Washington. And I think Hillary's disqualified for that reason alone. For that reason alone, the corruption.
Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, have you heard this story? That it was published. People who back Hillary Clinton can't believe it. I say, look at the story. The New York Times did an extensive, multi-page investigative story laying all this out. It's in the New York Times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving from the
Yes.
Republicans supposedly dragging their feet on the Supreme Court justice, and the Democrats dragging their feet on Hillary Clinton's email scandal.
Yes.
Let's move on to something like pork spending in Congress. Now, I heard you on another media outlet, I guess out of Manchester. I don't know if it was a radio show or an internet show. I couldn't quite figure it out. But you had mentioned that there's pork projects like, you said, a $70 million full-service gas station in Afghanistan. You talked about, I think it's the F-35 Air Force plane, which can't fly, and taxpayers are on the hook for about $1 trillion.
Over its lifetime, yeah.
And then you mentioned something about the Navy aircraft carrier USS Cole. Now, is pork spending sort of due to people who are backed by super PACs, and they're obligated, the Congress and senators are obligated to take care of their friends and contributors who help them? Or is it something else that...
Most of this stuff is legal, okay? You take a campaign contribution, you take a few $1,000 from a PAC, 10,000, whatever, and it's legal. And you can track the votes when that money is granted. You can see that the money does buy votes. It buys access, it buys votes. And the average member of the public who can't hire $1,000 an hour lawyers to go to Washington and lobby to get regulations adjusted to their needs, who can't afford to spend $5,000 to get a meeting with a U.S. Senator, that's about what it costs to get, not for me, but this is what it typically costs to get a face-to-face meeting with a U.S. Senator. You got to give them $5,000. You and your wife have got to. And the average American is frozen out, and you can see the relationships. Those entities, people and organizations, can give money in these sums, get what they want out of Washington. So if we're ever going to balance the budget and have fiscally responsible government, roughly like we do in New Hampshire, you've got to have people willing to name names and say which programs they're going to cut. And if you look at the presidential candidates, look at candidates for Congress, ask them, what will you cut? It's easy to talk about it. I think it was a $34 million gas station in Afghanistan. That's an easy one to talk about because no one can defend it. And yes, indeed, there was a $34 million gas station built at American taxpayer expense in Afghanistan. And the reason it was $34 million is because the massive corruption. The Pentagon's budget, now I got to preface this, I'm in favor of the strongest defense system in the world for America, the most strongest technologically advanced system of national security and defense in the world for the United States of America. That is not questioned. What I'm not in favor of is defense pork and corruption. The Pentagon budget, the national security budget, has not been at $600 million-ish a year now, including. It has not been auditable or audited for over 2 decades because the method by which the money is spent is so opaque and so difficult. Our Government Accountability Office cannot audit this. That's why we wound up with a $34 million-ish gas station in Afghanistan. Because a friend of mine worked in Iraq. He said pallets of $100 bills were dropped from helicopters and the money handed out. Okay, that is what it takes to operate the kind of wars that we operate in Iraq right now. And I'm not going to say that this is what happens. Okay, and we don't trace this money very well, and a lot of it goes into the hands of our enemies.
So
I mentioned the F-35. The F-35, the taxpayers are on the hook if it's built throughout its lifetime. The F-35 is the most advanced bomber.
Oh.
It's a multi-purpose bomber. $1 trillion. And it was leaked by a pilot who did a dogfight with the F-16, an older generation plane that we have in America. And the F-35 couldn't beat the F-16. It couldn't turn fast enough. It couldn't fly fast enough. This is insane that we're building an aircraft that cannot even compete with a 30-year-old airframe in America. Okay, we got to stop doing this stuff. The Abrams tank, we're retrofitting it. Why are we spending money? The Pentagon says we don't want to retrofit the Abrams tank because that's not the kind of war that we face anymore in America. Our military leaders tell Congress, do not fund this. And they fund it anyway. You know why? Because it's built in 200 congressional districts, and the pork is handed out sufficiently widely so that individual congresspersons, Congress critters can say, hey, I'm bringing home bacon to my district. Okay? And if we're ever going to get our budget under control, and if we're going to have a national security system with defense technology that actually defends America where we're weak, and we are weak in certain places, then we've got to stop the pork, and we've got to put the money into things we need. Our pants are down in cybersecurity. Iraq and China are ahead of us in cyber warfare. I won't go into more detail here, but again, it's fiscal responsibility, it's frugality, it's spending money on what we really have to spend it on, and it's cutting out pork. And candidates have got to name pork. If they're serious, name the big ones. Where are you going to cut?
Oh, that brings me back to
Yeah.
you and your campaign.
Yeah.
Are you being supported by super PACs and lobbyists? Or if you got elected, would you fall in the same trap as most of the other senators and congressmen?
Yeah, I'm lucky I'm able to self-finance to some extent, to the extent I want. That's my own decision. I did have 3 super PACs. I ran for U.S. Senate in 2014 as I came in second to Washington's pick, Scott Brown. They picked him and brought him in. He lost in the general. Washington likes to carry the out. So I'm the anti-establishment candidate. I'm the insurgent. And I did have 3 super PACs that got behind me in 2014. I can't tell you about this time. They choose. I'm not allowed to talk with them. They're not allowed to talk with me. I don't have any PAC money behind me. I am not I say it again, I'm not the candidate of the establishment. The lobbying groups in Washington don't find favor with me because I'm not in favor of being their handmaiden in Washington. That's why the jobs are being shipped offshore. It's why we have trade deals that are horrible for Americans. It's why we have open borders. It's why the wages are going down, okay? I'm not in favor of that stuff. I want to make Washington work for Americans. And that means those people in Washington who donate the big bucks to buy politicians, they don't have much use for me. I'm in favor of Americans.
So if you got elected, one of my favorite senators from way back when, I don't know if you remember him, I think he was from one of the Dakota states, South or North Dakota, William Proxmire. He had a periodic, it might have been monthly or quarterly or maybe even yearly,
The Golden Fleece Awards. The Golden Fleece Awards, yeah, I remember that. When I was a little kid.
Would you revise that? It seems like there's no congressmen or senators who took over for him.
Actually, Tom Coburn took over. He didn't call it the Golden Fleece Award. Tom Coburn is a doctor and MD. He just retired from the U.S. Senate a couple of years ago, and he would name names. He would speak about waste. He would speak about waste in the military budgets. He would have long lists of waste, and he was extremely frustrated. He is a conservative Republican, revered and respected in the U.S. Senate as a quiet, hard worker, and he got very little traction on this stuff, even though he was in favor of the American taxpayer. Don't spend taxpayer money on stuff that doesn't advance the national interest. Defense expenditures that don't help secure America and make us safe. And he didn't get far on that. So what's different now is, again, what we saw in this primary here in September, in February, right here in Amber. We saw the American public for the first time, maybe in decades, both on the right and left, have discovered that Washington is totally corrupt, and they want the establishment gone. They want people who are outsiders who are going to work for Americans. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to get a president. Maybe, just maybe, we're going to get enough turnover in the U.S. Senate and in the House so that we get people fighting for Americans again. And we're going to see this stuff change. I think Americans are ready for this, and that's why we have candidates coming up that are offering. This is why I'm offering this option right here in New Hampshire.
Wow. My next question
It's
was
good
going to
stuff.
be...
It's good stuff, and Americans have the right to make this change.
Okay, I don't know if you ever watched the Game Show Network. I kind of watch it every once in a while. And there's a dating game show called Baggage. And the host of the show, Jerry Springer, asked the two finalists, at the end, why should why should the contestant pick them for the date rather than the opponent? And well, I was going to ask you about Kelly Ayotte, but on your opening, you pretty much covered just about the differences between you and Kelly Ayotte.
There are many more, but I don't want to be too negative. I'm just trying to show people tell me, the establishment tells me, Jim, can't you be nice to her? I'm just pointing out contrasts, okay? The primaries are about choices, and I've told folks what my positions are, JimRubens.com again, and I've briefly mentioned how I differ from my opponent, and it's up to voters to decide.
Okay, hypothetically speaking, I know you candidates probably don't like to jump the gun or look ahead toward the future or anything like that. But hypothetically, let's say you beat Kelly Ayotte in the primary and you go against Maggie Hassan. What baggage can you point out the differences like between Jim Rubin and Maggie Hassan? Why should they pick you over Maggie Hassan if that's the general election?
Well, people can look at my 20-year record in New Hampshire public life, both in the U.S. Senate and in public life, doing a variety of things. I was awarded the Citizen of the Year award in 2013 by the New Hampshire Union Leader.
Oh,
Because I've done a lot of stuff. The Union Leader did endorse me when I ran for governor in 1998. They endorsed me, so I've done a lot of stuff. I've got a lot of stuff done. I mentioned the bills I got passed. I've started and run 10 small businesses. I got my hands on the ground. I understand the real world. I've lived here in New Hampshire for 45 years, wasn't born here, but I've lived here a long time. But I've got stuff done. I got my feet on the ground, I know what's going on, and I've got values that are in sync with Americans. And Maggie Hassan, as governor, has done pretty much nothing. She did a government shutdown, more or less, here in Concord last year. She fought the budget that was passed by Republicans, and then played games apparently for 3 months, and then she switched and she approved the budget, the same budget put together by Republicans in Concord. So she has fingerprints on nothing that accomplishes anything. And the work that needs to be done in Washington now on issue after issue, it's going to require tremendous work to build consensus around solutions, around big problems. We have had this budget deficit problem for 30 years. Our nation is not secure. We've had wages going down, as I mentioned, in America for almost 15 years now. For a long time. We've got very, very serious problems that Congress has ducked year after year. And if you put a do-nothing in that seat, you'll wind up with one of those 100, there are only 100 U.S. senators. If you put a do-nothing in the seat, it's more likely that nothing will get done. So you need someone who likes and loves doing stuff, who likes policy, who can build consensus, bring people aboard. It takes 60 votes in the U.S. Senate to get things done.
And she probably has her share of super PACs and lobbyists.
She's certainly
she's
just
side.
Another bought and paid for politician. So if you want all the stuff, you look what you need to do. What public needs to do, look at the campaign contributions, which you can find online now. You can go to opensecrets.org, and you can look at where the money comes from. And then you can say, well, how will they be voting? You can predict how they'll be voting by looking at opensecrets.org. And if you like those votes, if you like the strings that are attached to the politicians, to the typical establishment politician, then recognize you're going to get that. You're going to get what they're paying to obtain from those politicians. But on the other hand, if you don't like that stuff, or if you like if you don't like frozen government, because when those people buy you, you're frozen in place, and you can't move, you can't build consensus, you can't find the way forward.
Incredible.
Yeah. So there's two different ways to deal in Washington. People are, well, can't they just get along? Yes, you can cave in, you can capitulate, and you can vote for stuff that's the wrong thing for Americans. And you say, well, look what I got done. I got more of the bad stuff that I got more budget deficits. I got another $1.5 trillion in debt loaded onto Americans. Yeah, that's getting stuff done, but it's also capitulating. What you need to do, a person like me, you need to take your conservative values and you need to articulate them. You need to find a way to build bridges with your values to other people who might ordinarily not share them. That's how I got the charter school law passed in the state. I found bridges with my values in more freedom, more parental choice, more diversity in public education. I found a way to bring some Democrats aboard. And it doesn't mean capitulating. It means working your butt off. It means communicating with people. It means having open doors.
Ah, okay, so moving right along, let's go to a few issues that Donald Trump has initiated in the
Mm.
presidential election. Namely, are you in favor of a wall being constructed between the U.S. and Mexican border?
Yes, absolutely. We need a wall, and the reason we need a wall, as they found in, let's say, Germany and Austria, is because people who want to come to our country, and we do have a better quality of life. We're the best country in the world, and people from countries where there's corruption and murder, like in Mexico and Honduras, will come across our border, and they will sneak in illegally, and they will take our jobs, and they will sign up for welfare. 500,000 illegal aliens were kicked off Obamacare a couple of months ago. 500,000. They're coming in, taking our tax money. They're not legally here. So yeah, we have to build a wall, and whether the wall is natural borders, which exist in some places, electronic surveillance, but it has to be a wall that people can't come across. You can't be a nation without a border. It's
Okay,
pretty simple, and
yeah.
almost all the advanced nations of the world have borders. They have walls, and they work.
Do you think Mexico is going
Unless,
to pay for that
yeah,
wall?
I don't think Mexico will pay for the wall. Let's say the wall will cost. Let's say the wall will cost $12 billion. We can afford that. The savings just alone in people cheating and getting free medical care and welfare in this country will pay for it in a single year. So put up the wall, whether it's an electronic wall, a natural barrier wall, a physical wall, make a wall so that people can't walk across our border and come here illegally. We want people to come here legally, not illegally. And we want to choose who comes here. We want to choose people who will not take jobs from Americans. We want to choose people who will not create violence. We will choose not to have people come here from countries where people can hide their backgrounds and have violent and malintent to America. Absolutely, indeed, we need a wall.
Does the United States desperately need to renegotiate its current trade agreements with countries like China, Mexico, and Japan?
We certainly need to, where we already have trade deals, NAFTA, one of the big ones. We certainly need to take account of the fact that some of these countries manipulate their currencies to gain advantage. So when China depresses its currency by 2% or 5%, they make their merchandise cheaper than American merchandise. And these trade policies provide no mechanism to defend American workers against the Chinese Communist government that can manipulate their currency at will. It's not democratically run in order to suck jobs out of America and aggravate our trade deficit. So yeah, these trade deals need to be looked at again, and we need to resolve some of the problems that exist in them. And what we're looking at now is the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that Senator Ayotte voted for, okay? I disagree with that vote because we can see what happens with these trade deals. What happens? Wages go down, American jobs get exported, okay? American families are under financial pressure, and people in Washington have got to start thinking about American families again. And that's a difference of opinion I have with some of these establishment politicians, okay?
Do you honestly think it's doable and financially feasible to temporarily deport all Muslims residing in the United States until such time our own government can finally figure out what the hell is going on here?
We're not going to deport all the Muslims in this country. The vast majority of Muslims in the U.S. are peace-loving people. They're already here. We're not going to be able to round people up. However, let me talk about illegal aliens. Let's say there are 11 or 12 million in the country. Some of them are going to be from countries with hostile intent toward America. Any illegal alien in this country who's committed a felony, when they're adjudicated as guilty for having committed that felony, should be put on an airplane and sent back to their country of origin, okay? People who have violent intent toward Americans and commit crimes that harm Americans, go back home, okay? So beyond that, no, I'm not in favor of rounding folks up, but it's interesting to see what they've done in Arizona. Arizona, and it's one of the things I propose, enforce the existing laws, like put up a border, don't let people come here illegally. There's something called E-Verify, which is a federal law. That law requires employers to make sure they hire American citizens. What does that mean? It means that they're not hiring illegal aliens, and it means there's more job for American citizens. Arizona implemented that law at a state level about 3 years ago. What happened in Arizona? Construction wages went up 15%. almost immediately. Agricultural wages went up 10% without the government intervening in the private economy, simply because people driving down wages by working in the black market and cheating on taxes, etc., couldn't get a job. And the number of illegal aliens in Arizona dropped by 40% without anyone rounding anything up, because when they couldn't get a job, the illegals, they went back home to their families.
Incredible.
Jobs for Americans, okay? It's a simple rule.
Do you honestly think America can negate and then renegotiate last year's Iranian nuclear arms agreement?
The Iranians are cheating horribly. That deal was a bad deal. The Iranians are testing long-range missiles that they were not supposed to be doing. They're doing it. They began doing it within days of the agreement being signed. They just stuck a finger, a hot poker, right in our eye. They are continuing to test implosion technology, the technology by which nuclear weapons operate and function. They continue to test that. So ballistic missile technology, and the sums of money. Iran and as I mentioned, Saudi Arabia and some of the Arab monarchies, the Gulf state Arab monarchy, are some of the major funders in the world of terrorism and terror groups around the Middle East. Iran will use some of the money that will be released, it's not all released yet, to fund more of this terrorism. So the deal was a bad deal. Now, the problem is Europe is probably going to cave in and do the deal, but America does have the power to prevent Iran from using the American currency. Iran is cheating on the deal. They're promoting terrorism. We've got to hold them accountable. Is that an answer enough for you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, the Syrian refugee situation.
Yeah.
Should America be inviting these Syrian refugees in? I guess, in fact, Donald Trump brought up the fact that most of them, like on TV, the ones that are going in Europe, are mostly like 20-something, 30-something
Right.
year-old
Yes.
men,
Males.
young
Yeah.
men,
Right.
and you
Yeah.
hardly see any women or children
Yeah.
in that bunch.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump's referring to that as a potential Trojan horse that could be ISIS coming over here and starting trouble.
Exactly. And he's correct about that. What Jimmy Carter did, and we mentioned this before the show got going, Jimmy Carter was the first to implement a law passed by Congress allowing the president to restrict immigration or refugees from countries known to harbor terrorist or ill will toward America. So Jimmy Carter implemented this against Iran, and I think it was 1972 or 3. This is a Democratic president implementing this. The people from the entire country were disallowed to come here because we couldn't tell who the good guys and the bad guys are. Let's say it's only 1 out of 1,000 who's a bad guy, 1 out of 10,000. That single person can exact horror on an American city, okay? So for that reason, and in my 14-point plan as to how to deal with the Middle East and ISIS and terror, and again, you go to jimrubens.com to see that, and it's a lot more detailed than you can get into in a show like this. People don't like this kind of detail, but I got it, because I'm a policy wonk. One of the points is we need a place for Syrian refugees to exist safely in either Syria or Turkey. And it's up to the international community, including America, it's one of the 14-point plans, to create a safe space for refugees so they don't need to go to the EU. And we see what happens when they go to the EU, the terror that happens there in Paris and Brussels. We need to have a safe place for Syrians close to where they live so that when peace is restored, Syrians can go back to where they live. So that there is a solution. It's going to cost money. Americans have a role in helping do this because we're a generous country, and we prefer people to remain close to where they live so they can, when peace is restored, I hope it will be, can go back to their native and home country.
Okay. So this question, I can't really, and I don't know if I should accredit Donald Trump. He says, though, if he gets elected, he wants to put the H&R Block out of business because the taxes are too complicated.
Right.
But Ted Cruz has indicated if he's elected, he'll eliminate the Internal Revenue Service. Do you think it's honestly doable to completely dissolve the Internal Revenue Service as we know it?
It's a great applause line, but you can't get rid of you can change the name, you can't get rid of the IRS, okay? If we're going to collect taxes in America, and no one of any substance is saying that America is not going to collect taxes anymore, what we do need is a incredibly much simpler tax system. I'm a small business person. I got 3 small businesses. My tax return is about yay thick. And I'm about to get it in another 2 weeks.
Uh,
And I've asked my CPA to explain some of the pages in there. And he's got software, okay? And he can't explain some of the pages. When your own CPA can't explain some of the pages in a tax return because it's so infernally complicated, okay? Why is it so complicated? I already mentioned why. It's because people who have crony capitalists, they get down to Washington, they got their lobbyists, and they want the tax code super complicated, so there's in every complication is a special benefit for some crony capitalist who's able to pay off a congressperson or a congress critter to put that complication in there. So we need a less corrupt Washington, which will give us a simpler tax code. So we need a way, way simpler tax code. And it probably is possible for a wage earner who doesn't have a business to fill out a tax form on a postcard like that, or maybe even not fill out a tax form because they're not going to get any rebate or refund. It might all be digital and electronic. So we're still going to need an IRS because there still will be some taxes collected, and some people will continue to want to cheat. But the advantage of having a simpler tax code, 2 big advantages. Let's say you have a simpler tax code that collects exactly the same amount of money. You're cutting out the lobbyists. You're cutting out the crony capitalism and the pay-to-play politics in Washington, where corrupt politicians collect money from corrupt campaign contributors, all perfectly legal. You cut that out. You have a simpler tax code. You're going to save about $300 billion a year in tax compliance with a simple tax code, because that's the amount of money people spend filling out the forms and doing the paperwork. You're also going to wind up collecting somewhere between $200 $500 billion or more in taxes because it's so blasted complicated that people can cheat easily. And they don't trust it because it's so complicated. So if you can cut cheating out, you're going to raise $200 to $500 billion. And if you can make it simpler, you're going to save taxpayers $300 billion. Some serious money in just simplifying. And you make the tax code more, but you'll still need an IRS. You can give it a different name, you'll still need it.
Okay, we definitely have to talk about one of my favorite issues, Obamacare.
Yeah. Oh,
Why
yes.
couldn't the majority of Republicans, Republican majority in Congress and Senate, repeal Obamacare?
Incredibly great question. We've had Democrats are constantly chastising Republicans for how many votes have we had to repeal Obamacare? 70 votes or something, or 50 votes. I don't know what it is. Republicans need to put forth an alternative. I'm on my website again. It's one of my wonky things. I've got a very long multi-page plan with a replacement for Obamacare. So Republicans are obligated to put forth a plan that deals with the real problems in U.S. healthcare. Let's start with the real problems in U.S. healthcare that Obamacare has failed to address. We have the highest healthcare cost per person in the world, twice what our industrial nation competitors have. It inhibits job formation here because our healthcare costs are high. So to make something in America compared to West Germany, all else being equal, you have this high healthcare cost penalty that forces a job into West Germany or any other country. So we need to bring down healthcare costs. Obamacare has increased healthcare costs. So we've got the pre-existing healthcare condition problem that pre-existed Obamacare, which still exists even with Obamacare, because approximately 30 million people are still not likely to have insurance under Obamacare because the premiums are so high, the deductibles are so high, the co-payments are so high that people are simply not buying, and they're paying the fine instead. So people are what Obamacare has done, it has taken people out of private health insurance in the vicinity of 20 million people over a period of time between Obamacare being affected and the next few years. 20 million people will go off private health care, either individual or from their employer, and they're going to go either no health insurance or they're going to go into Medicaid, which is substandard health care. Why is it substandard? Because the rates paid by the federal government are so low that doctors won't accept new Medicaid patients. At hospitals, some of them, private hospitals won't accept new Medicaid because the rates of reimbursement are so low. So Obamacare has shifted us out of private care into an incredibly expensive system that has not attracted the uninsured, that has forced people and pressured people to go into Medicaid, which is substandard care. It has left the health care cost in the U.S. very, very expensive. It has, for the reasons I just described, not improved access. So what Republicans need to do is come up with a plan that addresses the real problems, the cost problem, the access problem. people with pre-existing conditions need a way to get health care. We're not going to throw people in the street in this country. So again, you go to my multi-point plan on my website, jimrubens.com, you will see a detailed replacement for Obamacare. So without going into a lot of detail on it, just one detail.
So even if, okay, let's
Yeah.
say we have a Republican president, either Ted
Yeah.
Cruz or
Yeah.
Donald Trump
Yeah.
in November, and
Yeah.
they'll take over in 2017,
Yeah.
and we have a majority Senate, Republicans have a majority
Yeah.
Senate and Congress, then Obamacare should be repealed.
Well, it's going to take 60 votes to get through the U.S. Senate. No one anticipates 60 Republicans in the U.S. Senate. So it's still Republicans need to come up with a plan that makes sense for Americans, that addresses the real issues, that spot treats. We do not need the federal government taking over U.S. healthcare. We're a private sector economy. We want to continue to have choice for customers. We want to have insurance choices. We want healthcare choices. We want people freely able to buy insurance. I want to get rid of a mandate. I want to force people to buy any particular insurance product designed by the government. That's insane, okay? How can the government design an insurance product that's right for me? They can't, okay? It's all crony capitalist. It's run by people who give out campaign contributions. I want to choose insurance the way I want to choose my doctor and provider and my insurance the way I want. So spot treat the problems. So Republicans are obligated, regardless of whether we run the Senate or not, we need to get to 60 votes. We need to come up with a plan that makes sense. And it's well accepted now that Obamacare has failed. The public sees this. The polling shows this. We're going to need to bring some Democrats aboard to get it passed. Democrats can see it's not working. So we've got to, as I did in my bills in the state Senate when I was a senator, build consensus, show a plan that works, that will bring health care costs down, that will bring access up so that people can get health care, that will bring quality up. We need to bring the quality of U.S. health care up. Show a plan, and that's what I'll do if I'm nominated and elected to be U.S. Senator. That's my job, is to find a way to build consensus around a solution that does not result in a government takeover of the healthcare system.
Okay.
And we can do this, and it's on my website again, jimrubens.com.
So getting back to ISIS, how to contain ISIS, do you think President Obama is doing a good job against ISIS in Afghanistan and the rest of the world?
No, he's not. And again, I got to send you to my website for the full detail. We got to cut off the money to the terrorists, okay? You've got to start that. You've got to strangle their financial resources. We're not doing that. Saudi Arabia has got to stop funding terror ideology. Turkey and other countries in the Gulf states have got to stop funding by providing actual dollars. We in America right now are fighting what's happening in the Middle East now. We've got to get to the root of the thing. It's a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, okay? And it's an incredibly convoluted, very complicated proxy war. There are 46 different factions, armed warring factions in Syria and Iraq alone, where alliances shift day by day depending on which entity can bribe them more to bring the soldier over. So among these alliances, you can't tell who these so-called moderates are. Our United States, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, Kelly Ayotte, backed arming and funding and training these so-called moderate rebels that became ISIS in 2012. The Pentagon, our military leaders, warned these people without a clear strategy. Don't do this because you will create a caliphate. Bang, within a year it happened. So we've got to stop money flow. That's number one. Number two, we have got to defend America. How do you defend America? We don't do it by spying on Americans illegally and contravening the Fourth Amendment. We ask people, like in San Bernardino, there was pipe bomb making in someone's apartment, okay? If you see pipe bombs in an apartment, be aware as an American, report it immediately. I want all American eyes to be American patriots. If you see stuff that's suspicious happening, report it to the authorities. We don't need to spy on innocent citizens to do this. So that's another of my points. We need to contravene terror ideology worldwide. It's rooted deeply in various countries right now. As I said, ISIS is operational as a result of these failed policies, Hillary Clinton's failed policies, and Kelly Ayotte's. ISIS is in 8 countries. We've got to contrast this ideology. We've got to do it on the internet. We've got to do it with social media. We've got to have hacktivists, and we've got to cultivate people who buy the Islamic faith. There are 2 billion people of Islamic faith around the world, most of them are peace-loving. We've
Yeah.
got to bring these peace-loving Islamic people into our side, promoting a peaceful version of Islam to these horrible, hateful people with malintent and death in their hearts. So we've got to organize this. This is long term. We also need to, as I has advocated on my website, if individuals in Syria or elsewhere, where in the many countries these people are operational, we need to take them out. We need to capture them, interrogate them, learn about their networks, and if we can't do that, kill them. So if there are individuals in these countries or elsewhere around the world that have harmed or threatened to harm Americans, we need to capture them, interrogate them, probably in Guantanamo, and or kill them if we can't capture them. That's another part of my plan. But it does not mean embedding our soldiers for generations into 8 countries where ISIS is now operational. First of all, we can't afford it. It doesn't work. It's non-sustainable. We need to, and another part of my plan, we need to recruit the regional powers around the Middle East that have 1.3 million soldiers under arms right now, the countries that are around there that are quasi-allied with us or have an interest in stability. Their soldiers should be on the ground fighting these wars in that country because they have a direct stake in peace in this area. So the idea of Saudi Arabia saying, hey, you United States, you be our mercenaries, I'm against that. Saudi Arabia, they've got a lot of soldiers. Send your soldiers into Syria and Iraq and fight these people. They're threatening you. Send your soldiers in.
Amen.
I am not in favor of American soldiers. They're coming back to our country. Half of our soldiers coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq have come back disabled. They have talked to me. I talked to a lot of our soldiers. These are patriots. They're the best soldiers in the world. They will fight where we send them. I know that. But they come back, and you know what they tell me? They're not going to do this in public. They tell me, what in heck was I there for? There was no strategy to win. They sent us over there. So I can go on in detail, but Congress ought to adhere to the Constitution. It's called Article 1, Section 8. If there's going to be a war, bring it to Congress and have a vote. Bring your plan to the American people and force Congress critters to vote for war. And it means that the people promoting the war have got to say their strategy. They've got to describe what is their strategy, how will we win, and how will we exit. And the people that are running these wars now do not have any strategy. They're simply flexing their muscles to show that they are hawks and they're in favor of a strong America, but they're not keeping America safe, okay?
Incredible.
So
Incredible.
I mean,
We're
just about out of time.
Excellent. I know.
So,
I timed that just right.
yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
knew you could explain and elaborate
And there's a lot more, okay?
on the issues.
I think you can get a sense of the kind of guy.
Yeah.
I think very carefully about
Yeah.
issues. I think really carefully about issues. And I want to make Washington work for the United States of America. I want to make Washington work for Americans. I'm giving you a choice in this primary, September 13th. JimRubens.com. You can sign up. You can volunteer. Thank you for having me on your show.
No problem.
Yeah.
And join us
Yeah.
next time for another episode of Frankly Speaking. Thanks a lot, Mr. Rubens, and I wish you the best of luck. Take care.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.